Hi everyone. Wave two paws if you wish. So yeah, it's great to be here. So I don't know, here we are. Thank you for coming. What a great thing. Meditation. I suppose we just show up, you know. It doesn't matter how mad the mind's things are or the mind's stuff is. So it's not really a content thing, meditation. We just show up and and then what? You know, it's funny. The story comes to me of like when my main teacher was Robert Aiken, and he learned to meditate in a prison camp in Japan during the war, civilian prison camp. So they weren't treated wonderfully, but they weren't treated terribly. They were fed and stuff. And so he learned to read from the great haiku translator Robert Blythe. So he learned to read Japanese, but also learn haiku and learn to meditate. And so then after the war, he went back to Japan at some stage after things had settled down and got an introduction to go to the temple. And then he, this big, tall, sort of stiff-legged gaijin, and he went in and they sat him on a cushion in the zendo, and his legs went up like that, you know, and they said, "So now," and he said, "Well, what do I do?" And they looked at him like, "Why would you ask?" You know. But anyway, so they told him. They said, "Count your breaths," and he said, "Yeah." They said, "Just to 10, start again." And then they walked out, and that was the extent of his elaborate initiation. And I think he had a pretty miserable time, but afterwards he felt purified. So that's something about meditation. You know, all these things come and go, and you see how you lose the things you're worried about, but you lose the things that you lose the things you're worried about. You lose the things that you love, but you also lose the things you're worried about in meditation. And so there's something interesting and odd about loss going on there, about stepping out of the circle of your life and the rules you have made for your life. You know. So someone asked Yunmen about meditation, how to do it properly. And Yunmen said, "The coin lost in the river is found in the river. Coin lost in the river is found in the river." So let's sit with that. I'll be quiet for a bit, and you can enjoy the silence instead of me. And the coin lost in the river is found in the river. You can tell, I can't get that by the grappling and frantically, getting scuba gear and diving down and things like that. You just have to, in a certain way, immerse yourself in the now, immerse yourself in the meditation. The coin lost in the river is found in the river. So I think we're just spending this time just, I don't know, stopping our efforts, enjoying the moment, or disenjoying the moment. The thing about the koan is it doesn't mind either way. So, you can fight the moment, you can fight with yourself. I think the whole, there's early kind of meditations when you're first learning to meditation, probably doesn't hurt to count your breaths. But do I count my in-breath or my out-breath? Yes, that kind of question, And there were long instructions. There was one Japanese teacher who associated with us who taught bamboo breathing, which is sort of a martial artsy thing, but you breathe out a little bit and stop. So there's a segment of the bamboo, and you breathe like that. And particularly doing a koan, and somehow he felt that helped. And I suppose I tried just about everything and nothing, really. When you're looking for awakening, nothing but awakening will do. So it's like, and I realized, oh, it's not about method, it's not about techne, you know. And so when we say, oh, well, your mind will get calm, it probably will, but that's not really what you're doing. And then if your mind gets calm and you start trying to make it calm, then of course that's not so good. So there's a wider field that happens beyond calm or turbulence or shame or honor or sorrow or joy. The coin lost in the river is found in the river. When I was thinking about doing a talk today, what rose up in my mind was some lines about loss from an old poem by Robert Hass, which Robert Hass is somebody, I came from, you know, Hawaii, where I'd been in a temple and things like that, and to Northern California, and Robert Hass was one of the people I immediately ran into. I didn't actually ever get to know him really. He asked me to do his wedding, and that was the extent of our intimacy. But we talked a bit about things, poetry and stuff. But so here, I'll read this poem of his, and it was a very famous poem, maybe it still is. I'm still not sure what I think of it. Meditation at Lagunitas, that's just down, sort of on the way to near Point Reyes, Inverness area, a very NorCal place. All the new thinking is about loss. In this it resembles all the old thinking. I thought that was kind of amusing, you know. It is, isn't it, you know. The idea, for example, and then I don't get this, the idea, for example, that each particular erases the luminous clarity of a general idea. I suppose he's saying that form erases emptiness, but I don't know. That the clown-faced woodpecker, acorn woodpecker, the clown-faced woodpecker probing the dead sculpted trunk of that black birch is by his presence some tragic falling off from a first world of undivided light. Or the other notion that because there is in this world no one thing to which the bramble of blackberry corresponds, a word is elegy to what it signifies. We talked about it late last night, and in the voice of my friend there was a thin wire of grief, a tone almost querulous. After a while I understood that talking this way everything dissolves, justice, pine, hair, woman, you and I. There was a woman I made love to, and I remembered how, holding her small shoulders in my hands sometimes, I felt a violent wonder at her presence, like a thirst for salt, for my childhood river with its island willows, silly music from the pleasure boat. Muddy places where we caught the little orange silver fish called pumpkin seed. It hardly had to do with her. Longing, I say, because desire is full of endless distances. Desire is long, because desire is full of endless distances. I must have been the same to her, but I remember so much the way her hands dismantle bread, the thing her father said that hurt her, what she dreamed. There are moments when the body is as numinous as words, days that are the good flesh continuing. Such tenderness those afternoons and evenings, saying blackberry, blackberry, blackberry. So I think he rescues it with blackberries at the end. And in a way we do, you know, we rescue the abstraction of the world and the loss with, oh, toast in the morning. Chekhov has a great line about after the funeral sort of line where in the morning we have toast. So he rescues his story that way. So loss. the Buddhist idea of, I think is that, Robert Hass is teetering between the Buddhist idea and the Zen idea in that poem. The Buddhist idea is, I suppose, that it's very hard to find something valuable in the world, and in the legend, the young prince, he can't bear his life of indulgence and surfeit, and he leaves the day his child is born. It seems an unfortunate choice to me, but but he does, and that's the story. And in other words, he cuts off everything that his heart might connect to, and then he goes off and has a lot of austerities, and eventually has an awakening and teaches Buddhism. And Zen has a kind of different idea, really, that there's that there's a kind of terrible loneliness in that, and that inside. But if you look inside your feeling of loneliness and loss, there's a jewel, there's a treasure. And I remember thinking about this when I decided I wasn't, when I became a Zen teacher, which hadn't been in my plan, and anyway, it's interesting when the universe does things to you didn't think you wanted, and then you have to say, well, maybe I did want it, or something like that. But then I had this young child, and I didn't want to be one of those people. I knew a lot of kind of famous teachers who traveled around the world and sort of kind of knew their kids, but I didn't want to do that. So I took her everywhere with me, and sometimes her mum, and when she was really young, her mum, and but her mum was often sick and didn't come, and but I remember there's a whole story about Buddha sneaking out of the palace at night, and the gods help him, and they have these great war horses, and they're riding on this great. He and his charioteer riding these two beautiful great horses, and they muffle their hooves, and the earth spirits hold up their hands so they won't go clop clop either when they go out, and they just glide out into the night. Kind of magical scene, really, in this great white horse and the great dark horse, and then I felt, well, and after he said goodbye to his child and wife, without saying goodbye, he just looked in on them, and. The way I left the palace was I got on a Qantas flight across the Pacific to go teach sesshin with my kid. We used to have the kind of bassinet in the bulkhead, and so if you got in the front seat by the bulkhead, you could put your kid in the bassinet, where they would happily go to sleep. Except, of course, mine didn't just wail the whole way across the Pacific, which is quite a substantial amount of wailing. If you think about it, it's like a 12-hour flight. And it was kind of touchy, and I thought, oh, God, and I didn't know then to bring Benadryl or something and just drug the poor child, And so I'm there holding, and her mother's exhausted and passed out, and I'm there sort of trying to, stroke this kid's. And I think she had colic, and maybe she was starting her teeth or something. I don't know. But she was really young. Couldn't speak, really. Couldn't explain herself. But anyway, and then the steward from first class is this really sweet, kind of Sydney guy. He came in and he said, "Here, put that in your luggage," and gave me a bottle of champagne from first class. And he said, "It's hard to have a nipper." and then I thought, yeah, let's hear it for stewards from Sydney. And so he said, "Don't declare it." And so I and then a little while later he came back with a bottle of, he was wailing, he said, and he gave me a bottle of red wine as well. So he felt like I really needed some consolation. So it was sort of fun. So, but that loss, I think you have that loss whether you abandon the child or don't abandon the child or take it with you, and loss is just what you have, in life. And so we have to have some negotiation with it. And I think the Zen thing is that the gold or the beauty is inside. There's nothing that it isn't inside. So if you're full of longing, and sorrow. If you've lost someone you loved, which, happens all the time to all of us, right? You might have lost, Elizabeth Bishop says, I lost 2 cities and a continent, so you might have lost your country, things like that. Zen says, nonetheless, inside it all, there's life. There's those, Bob Hass's blackberries. And there's that, and even the taste of sorrow has it, or even the taste of, if you feel depressed about something, it's a fierce, marvelous emotion, the valleys of life. The old wisdom masters used to think the valleys were really important. Everybody tries to jump over them and miss them, but if you haven't had the sorrow and the depression and things like that, it's very hard to have empathy with people. You're always like bleating about yourself, and it's a popular human activity. Anyways, I should feel better than this. You should make me feel better than this. Well, perhaps that's not a possible thing. Perhaps that's up to you. So Elizabeth Bishop is the obvious person to read, and I thought when I started thinking about this, I thought what I won't do is read her famous poem One Art, which is about the art of losing, and I was looking at other poems, and because there are more subtle ways to say this, but it's such an interesting poem that I'm going to read it anyway. One Art. The art of losing isn't hard to master. So many things seem filled with the intent to be lost that their loss is no disaster. Lose something every day except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The party you went to and you think, God, why did I come? Lose the hour except the fluster of lost door keys, the hour badly spent. The art of losing isn't hard to master. Then practice, so she makes it a spiritual practice, then practice losing farther, losing faster, places and names and where it was you meant to travel. None of these will bring disaster. I lost my mother's watch, and look, my last or next to last of 3 loved homes went. The art of losing isn't hard to master. I lost 2 cities, lovely ones, and vaster. Some realms I own, 2 rivers, a continent. I missed them, but it wasn't a disaster. Even losing you, the joking voice, a gesture I love, I shan't have lied. It's evident the art of losing's not too hard to master, though it may look like, write it, like disaster. It's a strange, interesting poem because it's her life. Her lover had died. They were living together in Brazil, and her lover actually killed herself, I think, and was prone to depressions and drinking and things. And so that was really it. And so eventually she had to leave Brazil because she did, and came back to the US. And I think the poem, I think it was a very, very hard loss for her, and the poem puts it in a very, very tight English poetry form, with the same words repeated over and over again. The sort of form you learn about if you take English Lit in last year of high school, something like that. So, and also it's so untrue. She just, at the end, she's right about losing the continent. I miss them, but it wasn't a disaster. But losing you, she's trying to persuade herself it wasn't a disaster, and she shows that in the poem. So part of it's mastery. And what it is it's not about losing there, it's about the effort not to feel losing, feel the loss, And there's a great koan Jiaozhou has where, what if it's a disaster? That's it too. And I mean, you know, there's plenty of disasters if you look for them all over the world. Because I grew up in Australia, and for some reason we were quite connected to Africa in those days, and so I'm very aware of all the disasters happening in Africa, you know, which is sort of vastly outweigh the disasters that we focus on. You know, no, I don't know if they do. Does one disaster outweigh another? I'm not sure that's true, but they're not far to seek. You know, countries tearing themselves apart, lots of cruelty and loss and death. So, and then I've been reading, because John Joseph is interviewing Kim Stanley Robinson, who's a famous sci-fi writer. But he's really a scenario writer, I suppose. He writes kind of thrillers about the way we arrange the world. And this one is about climate change and how people, you know, is there a chance to, how people will react, and is there a chance to survive it, and things like that. You know, there are all sorts of scales of loss, I guess. And I've been reading that, and I thought, wow, this is, it's easy to get depressed reading this stuff, you know. And, but, you know, oh, it's in that too, you know, it's in that too. And that's what the great old KOAN people studied, you know. Countries tearing themselves apart, and they were living in the middle of it, you know. And so trying to teach people a way through, is there a way, is there a path, is there a way to walk? And I've been saying this for a while recently, as it looks like that the world won't suddenly come to rights and get sane, you know. It's not. So how do we live in this? And I think Mazu's thing, make of yourself a raft to ferry people to the other shore, you know, and that we need to offer a path through the demons, really, you know, and that's what we can do. I mean, there are other good things you can do too, like reduce carbon emissions or whatever your thing is. But there's so many areas to work in. But what I can, at some stage I realized consciousness was the thing I could interfere with and work with, and sort of was my art, really. And so that's what we can do. We can offer a way to walk through. And you know, and it gets kind of tricky because, you know, loss teaches us so much, you know, and we become so much wiser through loss. And everybody says that, you know. Oh, I just got a cancer diagnosis. I feel much happier about the world, and I treat people better. That kind of thing, you know. And something I'm personally familiar with, actually. But yeah, and so, but also there's a sorrow as a genuine thing, and we can't lie about that either. And as a child, I had to read, you know, Paradise Lost and these long, great English classics that, you know, marvelously written, but sort of some way dubious books, you know. And but I remember this particular section from Milton's Paradise Lost, and Blake read Paradise Lost and said, Milton was of the devil's side but did not know it. And Milton was a Puritan who wanted to, you know, make England much more, I don't know, Puritan and hard to live in, basically. And he lived through the Civil War, when the Puritans rebelled against everything and took over and smashed all the windows in the cathedrals and things. And because, I don't know why people do things like that, but revolutions always smash all the windows in the cathedrals. Whatever their theory of it, it's what they do, like the Maoists. Or Blake said, hell, in Milton, hell is energy, hell is eternal delight. And here's a little passage from Paradise Lost where the devil is considering his next move, and he's looking over the abyss as he's fallen out. He's left heaven, he's fallen out of heaven, been thrown out of heaven. You can't quit, you're fired, you know. And he's been thrown out of heaven by God. And you can tell all the energy that's in him. Into this wild abyss, the womb of nature and perhaps her grave, of neither sea nor shore nor air nor fire, but all these in their pregnant causes mixed, confusedly, and which thus must ever fight, unless the Almighty Maker them ordain his dark materials to create more worlds. Unless the Almighty Maker ordains them ordain his dark materials to create more worlds. Into this wild abyss the wary fiend stood on the brink of hell and looked a while, pondering his voyage, for no narrow frith, no narrow passage he had to cross, no narrow frith he had to cross. So sometimes we feel like that. We're on the brink of, I don't know, some kind of disaster. And we have to sort of, the nice thing about the devil there is he sits and ponders about it, which in Paradise Lost, I don't think God does very much. He's always right and quick. But, yeah. The other thing I noticed about, I'll just say this and then I think we'll go into a longer meditation, but some years ago now, quite a while ago now, I got a ghost satellite call in where I was in the Himalayas in a Tibetan temple about 11,000 feet, and it just left a voicemail, and the voicemail said, "I hope you've evacuated." And and since there was it was just one of those things where the signal bounced off God knows what, and I didn't even know why my phone must have been on. I was using it for a clock probably, and I thought, well, I don't need to evacuate from this temple, this Tibetan temple, and I figured out it must be fire because earthquake. Nobody tells you to evacuate. No, right? So it's either fire or a tsunami warning, and so it was fire, and so I don't know. And then I thought, and I just thought, well, I don't need to think about this right now. So I didn't, and went back, and a Rinpoche was teaching, and it was being translated, and I was teaching, things like that. And it was quite interesting kind of disturbance to think, oh, what's going on? And then a couple of days later, we got into Wi-Fi, and then I got the news that my house had burned down, and which turned out not to be true. Just spoiler alert. But it turned out not to be true, except the front had burned, and cracked some windows and things. And so I got it. As I've said, I never liked the front of the house, so I got a much better front out of that. But the interesting thing for me was when I heard the house had burned, and the things I love, Mayumi, I've got a lot of Mayumi Oda paintings and all sorts of stuff here. And just not, I don't know how important it is really, books, 1830 navigation instrument given to me by my grandfather, things like that. But you can tell that life is not made of those things, however much you like them and care about them. And so one of the first things I felt like, oh, that'll be fine. That'll be fine. And it was really, really interesting because you can't lie to yourself about stuff like that. Actually, it was fine. I thought, it'll be kind of interesting. I'll have to I don't know if I'll rebuild or not. A few architectural plans went through my mind, and then maybe I'll move somewhere else. Or it could be kind of fun. Lots of people move somewhere else and have a better life. And my ancestors moved somewhere else, so like that. And then later on, a friend who drove a big AT&T truck, and she threw the cordons, and she went up to my house and sent me photos saying only the front was burned. And I was almost mildly disappointed. And then I had a friend recently who said, and I talked to one of the monks. He asked one of the monks who was traveling with us, Tibetan monk. He asked me how I felt about it. And I said, well, it's kind of interesting. Might enjoy whatever's next, because all the things I thought I was doing, I've got to fix this in the house. I've got to blah blah blah. I was free of that. I have to reorganize my office. not actually, au contraire. And so it was sort of rather nice not being burdened by things. And Pico Iyer said this great thing. He was on John's program recently, and he said when his house burned, in Santa Barbara, one of the fires in Santa Barbara, he long ago now, he was working at Time magazine in the days when that was something, and his editor said to him, "Oh, that'll be." And he said, "I lost my next 3 books," and he felt both apologetic and devastated. And the editor said, "Well, you'd now just be able to really write them. They'll probably be better." And so, and he's a massive note taker. If you take a walk with him and you say anything vaguely interesting, out comes his notebook and he writes it down. So I said something about, well, there is that comment that goes, "Not knowing is most intimate," and out came his notebook. Things like that. So to lose all the notes that your mind is always taking, my mind is always making little mentions and notations, and the mind is always describing the world so it will exist, so the self will exist. And without the description, we're a lot freer. We're not so imprisoned in the little bamboo tube or whatever it is. Snake in the bamboo tube is one of the metaphors. And so and then somebody there's a performing artist who came to Sesshin and stayed with us for a couple of weeks and lives in Amsterdam. When he went back to Amsterdam, he noticed that he had a storage unit in New York where he stored all his precious stuff, things from his family, snap letters from ancestors, guitars. He's a musician, things like that. And he noticed the storage people hadn't billed his credit card, and so he called him up to find out what happened. They said, "Oh, we kept sending email to you and you didn't answer, so we just auctioned off the storage." And he's like, and he said, and they'd somehow manually typed out his email and transposed a couple of letters, and so it was going nowhere. And it was funny, and he's just come back from Sesshin, he feels all wise and full of equanimity. And then he said, "Oh, I realized I wanted to have kids and give some of those things to my kids and things like that." But when he looked, he noticed his first feeling was relief. So I never have to go to that storage locker and decide if those guitars were worth paying storage for all these years and things like that. So I noticed this when I was pretty young. When I was like 3, I moved. We went to live with my grandfather's place, and my maternal grandfather and grandmother's place, and must have been incredibly crowded, I realised later. But so I spent a lot of time out in the street playing, which kids did in those days, and making mud pies in winter and just playing. And I was out in the street playing with some trucks and toys and things that I had. And a little kid from across the road told me that robbers had come in the night and stolen his toys, all of them, and he didn't have any. And I don't know, for some reason I fell for that. But I didn't really know, that sounded reasonable to me. Robbers might, if they came in the night, what else would they take but toys? And so I said, "Oh, well, you can have some of mine," And I felt like I had a great luxury of toys. When I came to America, I realized I hadn't had any toys, considering the profusion of them here. But so I had, I don't know, I had 5 or 7 toys or something, and I gave most of them to him. And I've still got like 1 truck left or something, and I'm out there playing. And my parents say, "Hey, what happened to you? Where are the rest of your toys?" And I explained to them this poor kid across the road and his terrible thing that happened to him, how I had helped him out by giving him some of my toys. And my parents, who actually, really, obviously they were living with my grandparents because there was no work, there was an economic depression in Australia at the time, things like that. And it was very hard to get work. And my mother was looking after us. My father was desperately trying to get work. And so they marched across the road and had a conversation with the kids' parents and came back with the toys. And but I had remembered that when I gave away the toys, it felt kind of great, you know. So there was that. And it wasn't that I was being generous or something. It just felt like, oh, I don't have to curate and manage that part of the world anymore. So I think it's a real thing that inside loss, if you look, there's a Native American, I think it's Lakota, or maybe it's just one of those things that's always attributed to Lakota. But inside the last tier, happiness is hiding, you know. The eternal sound, I sometimes think the ancient sound, but actually is timeless, isn't it? Temple bell, the temple bell. What does sitting correctly and contemplating true reality mean? So I guess somebody must have given, how do you meditate? Sit correctly and contemplate true reality. The person thought, what? And sitting, but you can tell there's something there, you know, sitting correctly and contemplating true reality. There's a sitting hexagram in the I Ching, this mountain over mountain, and that's what it is, sitting correctly, contemplating true reality, becoming one with the mountain. And the master said, Yunmen said, the coin lost in the river is found in the river. There is no other life. We have this moment, we have this music. So we don't even have to arrange our thoughts in a prettier formation. We don't have to squash them, line them up in rows, have none of them. There's no other life than this. Coin lost in the river is found in the river. The coin is found in the river. Not direct necessarily to do with this koan, but the river was a metaphor for everything that's pouring through you all the time. Thoughts and feelings, hunger, thirst, desire, sorrow, excitement, anticipation. What is sitting correctly and contemplating reality? A noble question, two noble questions. The coin lost in the river is found in the river. There's a thing about meditation I noticed years ago. If I'm unhappy with my meditation, it doesn't seem like to be a good way to adjust it. It's like you're watching a screen and you're adjusting the screen, but actually your life is not inside the screen, you know. And I remember this guy who was kind of crazy and came to see me, and every time there was a disaster in the world, he'd get terribly upset and he'd choose a side and he'd start getting more upset. And then he'd watch feeds of the disaster on the networks and things. And then one day he's in a Doksan, he said, oh, I get, you know, it's like I'm watching a screen and I'm not inside it, and it pulls me in so I think I'm inside it. And that's all his thoughts, you know, thoughts and feelings. And if with him it was really hard, he attempted suicide, things like that, you know. Serious attempted suicide, actually. But yeah, and but he was a touching, interesting person. He said, I realize I'm trying to fix my life by adjusting the screen, you know. But the screen is out there somewhere, you know. And he had a dream about that. He dreamed that he was adjusting a television screen when actually he was fine. But what was going on the screen wasn't, you know. And I thought, oh, that's sort of a Zen kind of progress, you know. But you can't ever, and you'll notice that a problem will come up in your meditation. You start fixing it, and you realize, hang on, this problem isn't real. I'm meditating. Then you go, what do? You go back to the coin lost in the river is found in the river. You have to go back to the river. So yeah, so it's rather wonderful, really. The river will carry me. You can't always control when delusion catches you either. Just you just notice, oh, hang on, I'm inside that television again. I'm inside that computer screen again. So in this guy's dream, he noticed, oh, he could be outside, and he noticed that, and he noticed, oh, I don't have to believe what's going on in the screen. It doesn't have to be to do with me, or on the computer screen, or whatever he was watching on. And there were a bunch of, teachers. Actually, there was a sort of fashion in a certain teachers telling people, just change the channel if you're upset. I think it's stranger than that, but you can tell where they were trying to get to. And so in the dream, he realized he pulled way back, and he realized all this stuff is going on. It's just a dream. It's just images on a screen. And he felt so relieved, and then in the dream, he got sucked straight back into it, which meant that he could have a glimpse of awakening, but the whole thing was going to be a lot of work. And after 20 years, I just heard from him. The other day, he sent me an email saying that he was doing well, and he was running a group. He was running groups for survivors of suicide attempts, and things like that. And so I just wished him well, and all is well. George Foy, you're a writer. You think about loss. Writers always do. Do you have anything to say? It's landed on you.
It's interesting that you brought up Elizabeth Bishop, because, well, I'll explain why. And what you said about loss brought to mind a relationship I had, which was incredibly powerful, and kind of thing where you felt so much part of somebody else that when you were holding each other and one of your legs moved, you weren't sure if I wasn't sure if it was my leg or her leg moving. And it was completely falling in love. And of course, it ended. And I was devastated, and I wasn't suicidal, but I was sort of paying less attention when I was jaywalking, that kind of thing. And this went on for a long, long time. And one evening I was sitting in a bar on an island, and it was the island that Elizabeth Bishop came to when in Penobscot Bay, when she had lost her lover in Brazil, and she was also mourning Robert Lowell, whom she was friends with. And I was sitting with a drink and thinking about, as usual, this loss, and it suddenly came to me that I couldn't have really understood what we had if it hadn't ended, if I hadn't lost this. I couldn't see myself separately from it, and I couldn't identify myself until it had ended. And as I followed that logic, helped by the rum, no doubt, I realized that if this was true, then every time I lost something, I was defining myself a little bit better or more. And if you kept following that, then if you lost everything, that would be the point at which you would perfectly identify yourself. At which point you would be defining yourself perfectly by having nothing left that defined you. You would define yourself by the act of being nothing. And at which point I think I ordered another drink. But that's what this brought to mind. Thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to hear also how close the two of you were. That's kind of a miracle, isn't it? When you're not
Yeah.
sure you moved and things like that. And it seems like it's always seemed to me like it was worth it for that.
Yeah.
Even
And
though
the pain of it, even though it was incredibly painful, it was something that also made me more alive than I'd ever been.
yeah, something, isn't it? Yeah. Very good. Thank you, George. That was good that I called on you. Christina.
That's a hard story to follow. um, the thing that's been there's a poem that's been lurking in my mind that when you read the Haas poem, that repetition of the word blackbird. Blackbird, I've been thinking about a poem by Jack Gilbert, in which he's his wife is dying, and he's with a woman that he's having a love affair with, kind of as a way to getting everybody through the situation. She has a small child, and he keeps throwing the child up in the air. And when he throws the child up in the air, he says, Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh, which is the place that he was raised. And his hope is that somewhere further in the child's life, he won't remember that situation, but something in the word Pittsburgh will trigger some internal feeling for that child of a kind of freedom and joy. And I know for some reason I've been carrying that poem around, so it's funny to hear the Haas poem with the blackbird in it repeated like that.
Wow. He's an amazing, wonderful poet. Yeah, thank you. That's beautiful. Yeah. John Joseph, you got anything you want to say about loss?
Well, I love this koan, the koan lost in the river, and whenever I hear it, there's like a family story that's attached to it, and that family story comes up. And a branch of my paternal grandmother's family lived up in the gold country in California, and there were ranchers and stagecoach drivers, and my grandmother was a school teacher, and then I guess her great uncle or her uncle was a miner, and he found, I later read this, she wrote out a note. It's really beautiful how she laid it out, but he found this huge nugget, like the size of a walnut, in this little creek. I think it was called Jackass Creek in Angels Camp, and when he died, he passed it on to my grandmother, and when she died, she passed it on to my father, and it was like our family treasure, and it was found in the river. And then my father was living in out in the Delta, Sacramento Delta, in like a trailer. Somebody broke into his trailer, stole everything, including the nugget, the family treasure. And I guess I didn't hear about that till my dad had passed away, and I guess he probably felt shame, the shame of that loss. So that loss, yeah, feeling that loss and reliving that loss, and loss of my father, loss of my grandmother.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so funny because a nugget of gold isn't any use really unless you turn it into money or something like that, which it then isn't any use unless you turn it into, rum in a bar in Penobscot Island. But yeah.
I was thinking of George's story, and then I thought, well, maybe I've gotten more pleasure out of the loss, or more feeling out of the loss, than if it still existed. Probably be in a bank vault somewhere.
Yeah.
Never see it.
When I was at National University for a while, and it gets kind of cold in Canberra, it snows sometimes, things like that. We used to in Australia, and anyway, and I didn't have any clothes for the cold, but I went and I got a really nice sweater, found a really nice sweater in an opportunity shop sort of thing. It's like a ski sweater. It looked like I was a completely different kind of person than I really was. It made me look much more respectable. And I'm this starving student who did Aikido and things. But and it fell off the back of my bike one day. And I realized after about 2 minutes, I went back and it had gone. And I just couldn't believe it. I rode back and back over it. But that sweater's still with me, and in a certain sense keeping me warm in a way that I wouldn't have remembered it one little bit if I hadn't lost it. So yeah. Try again. The perfect bell, the ancient, perfectly ancient bell. Great Mazu said, the whole meaning of your life is in this current moment. Right here with us. That's what you have to put up with. It's wonderful, isn't it, that there's nothing greater than this moment. Jesse Carden, do you have anything you want to say? You know a lot about carting young children across the ocean in airliners.
This time it's the other generation. I have my in-laws staying with me for a couple of weeks, and it just occurred. It's a cliche thing. It's tough, and in our refuge class, Allison, Tess, and I are doing our next precept is I vow not to be stingy. And I realized how incredibly stingy I am with my life, with the in-laws around. Like, I'm calculating what I will give and won't give, time and energy, and what sort of activities I will and won't do. And I realized it just occurred to me that it seems to be in service of preventing that sense of loss, that somehow my life could be lost. And it has felt that way for the last few days. I just sort of feel underwater, and like my life has been taken from me, and my emotions are out of whack, and I'm tired, and my house is messy. And it just occurred to me this morning that I can do the laundry. This seems like refuge all of a sudden, and all throughout the meditation this morning, I keep getting the image of a pile of clean laundry on the dining room table, and I'm going to go fold it. And like, that feels so great. So there it is, rescued by the laundry, rescued by the blackberries. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, I think, thank you. I feel so honored to be in your presence, and what a great thing.